Okay, so the video today is going to be on writing and evaluating expressions. And the first thing we're going to talk about is taking an expression that you're given and just simplifying it, evaluating it, find the answer. And in this case, when they want you to do this, they're going to give you the value of the variables. So like you can see here, it says evaluate 8p divided by 3 when p equals 6. So this actually is a pretty easy problem. All we have to do is take the 6 and plug it in where the p is. So I have 8. I know when the p is right next to the 8, that means multiplying. So I'm going to do 8 times 6 divided by 3. Now, the order of operation tells me when I have multiplying and dividing, I can just go from left to right. So I'm going to do the 8 times 6 first. And 8 times 6, of course, is 48. And then I'll divide that by 3. And 48 divided by 3 is 16. And that's my answer. That's all I've got to do. Just plug in the missing number for the variable and follow your order of operations. So again, down here, I have two variables now, but it gives them both to me. So I know when I have 12h next to each other, that means we're going to be doing 12 times whatever h is. In this case, h is 6. I'm just going to do 12 times 6. And then I'm going to add to that 6 times whatever I is, and then in this case it's 5. Now, again, order of operations. I go back to that, and I know I need to multiply before I add. So I'm going to do 12 times 6, which is 72, and I'm going to do 6 times 5, which is 30. And now I'm just going to add those up, and I see that I get 102. And that is all I have to do for these ones. It's that simple. Plug in whatever's missing with what they give you. So now what we have to talk about is if you have a word problem and you want to change it into an expression like the ones we had on the last page, what words, we have a bunch of keywords, and there's some keywords that tell us that we need to add in a problem. So I want you to think right now, maybe write a couple down, some words that when you see them in a word problem, what words tell you need to add. So go ahead and pause the video and then write down a couple thoughts, start it up again, and I'll show you the ones that we have. Okay, so some of them that I came up with are some straightforward ones. Some means to add, plus, obviously, more, greater, increase, total, or addition. Anytime you see any of those words in a word problem, it's going to tell you that you have to add. Okay, now I want you to do the same thing for subtract. Pause the video for a second and write down a couple of words that you can remember that tell you you need to subtract when you have that in a word problem. Okay, so the ones that I have are difference, minus, less than, decrease by, and subtraction. Pretty much they're all just the opposites of what the adding ones were, which is normal because subtraction is the opposite of addition. Okay, so multiplication, I'd like you to do the same thing. Pause the video for a second and write down any things you can think of that you know when you're seeing a word problem means you got to multiply. Okay, so there's fewer for multiplication and division than in subtracting. The ones I have for multiplying are product, times, multiply obviously, and then that word of, we use that a lot when we're talking about percents or fractions. Okay, if I want to say 25% of 100, that actually means to do 25% times 100. Or half of the class, that means 1/2 times the number of students in the class. So that word of does tell us to multiply. And now I want you to do division. So go ahead and pause the video and write down any words you know of that mean to divide. Okay, so there's only a couple of these. Quotient means to divide, and then obviously divide. Anytime you see the word per, now the per you got to be careful of because per actually means to divide, but sometimes when we see it in a problem, we actually need to multiply. Like if I'm driving 55 miles per hour for 3 hours, I need to multiply those to figure out how far I went. So even though that word per is in there, I'm not dividing those numbers because the per means number of miles divided by hours, so miles per hour. So that's where you got to be careful with that. So let's try doing a couple of these. A couple of simple ones first. I'm just going to look at it and say, okay, I've got a quotient of a number in 3. So quotient, when I look back in the page, quotient means divide. So now I've got the division. And anytime I see this, a number, right, where it says a number, that tells me I'm going to use a variable. Now your variable can be any letter that you would like. Some people will always use X, some people always use Y, some people always use N, some people choose it to kind of go along with the problem. It's totally up to you. You can use any letter that you want when you're doing this. So if I'm going to do the quotient of a number, so X, I'll use, and 3, that's going to be X divided by 3. Now, the key here, whenever I have the word quotient, or product, or sum, or difference, I'm going to look for the word and. That tells me where the operation actually goes. So I know quotient is dividing, and now I scan through and I look for and. When I see this and over here, that's where the division is going to go. So I had a number, or X, divided by 3. And that's how I came up with this. Okay, so that's very important. Quotient, sum, difference, product. Those are ones you look for the word and. That tells you where the operation goes. Now this one over here, a number multiplied by 9. Again, I'm looking at a number. So that's going to be my variable. So if I, maybe want to use y this time. So there's my variable multiplied by 9. That's easy. One thing though is I'm not actually going to leave it written like this as a y divided by 9, because if I use y divided by 9, or y times 9, it just doesn't look right. Anytime we're doing geometry, or I'm sorry, algebra, we like to always write the number and then the letter afterwards. Okay? Anytime you multiplication, even though it says the number multiplied by 9, because the commutative property works in multiplication, which means I can multiply in either order. When we're writing out these expressions, you always put the number in front of the variable for multiplication. Always. So that's just another key thing to remember. And just a couple more examples here. Okay, if I look at this one, I see I've got the sum. That tells me I'm going to be adding. But remember, this is one of those ones I have to look for the word and to know where this addition is actually going. So here's my and. That's where I'll put the addition sign. So I'm going to put 7 plus, because I had the and there, so that's where I need the addition sign. A number, that's where I make up my variable, times 5. Okay? Now, again, I don't want to leave that x times 5 like this. I just said on the last one, you always put the number first. So I just go through the problem and I write down everything as it should be. Now I'll go back and rewrite it so it looks correct. In algebra, I'm going to write 7 plus 5x. And that would be my final answer. That's the way I write it. Now also notice that up here I use the dot for multiplying. I don't want to use the x there because I already used an x for a variable. So that gets kind of confusing. That's why you'll see most people will use the dot, or I do always when I'm writing these the first time until I change it correctly and put the number first so I don't get confused by x as a multiplication sign. So one more example. I have the product, and again, that's one of those ones I gotta look for and. I know product means to multiply, so where that and is, that's where I'll be multiplying. So I'm going to be doing 3 times, for the and, 4 less than, I'm going to have subtraction in there, a number. However, there's a problem with this. 4 less than a number is not going to be 4 minus x. Okay? If I told you somebody was 12 years old and Joe was 4 less than that, you wouldn't do 4 minus 12 to get Joe's age. You would do 12 minus 4. So the less than, you actually have to switch around the two terms there. So I have 3 times x minus 4. Now, one other thing that makes this special. I'm multiplying the 3 by this whole thing here, whatever I get when I do x minus 4. That tells me I want to do x minus 4 first. So that means I'm going to put x minus 4 inside of parentheses so that I know I do that first, and then I take that answer and multiply by 3. So that's how I take these word problems and change them into algebraic expressions. I look at it, I find my keywords. If I need to look for and, I know that's where it goes. And then I just go through originally and write down what everything means. And then I get it all rewritten the correct way. And that's how we take word problems and write them as algebraic expressions.